Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. In this week's video, we're going to talk about how that 6-word phrase really is the reason we're in this housing crisis right across the country. We're also going to talk about what the federal government plans to do to fix it. We got a little bit of a line of sight into that, and we're going to cover that in this week's video. So I'm going to skip the formal introduction, but if you haven't been to my channel before, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and if you want to know what I do and how I can help you, you can read all about that in the description box below. But I want to jump right into it. We're in the middle of August right now, dog days of summer. Quite a slow market when it comes from a transactional perspective. Last week we had one of the slowest weeks we've had all year, which is pretty typical of August. Now, August is a great time for certain things, right? It's great for families to take vacations. It's a great time, in my opinion, for realtors to do some business planning as we head into Q4. And to, put some thought into what's happening out there, not necessarily just with the local market, but what's happening from a housing perspective nationally. So, for myself personally, I've been thinking a lot about, where we're at from a housing crisis scenario. You're hearing about more and more people finding it impossible to find new housing, whether that's on the rental front, whether it's people trying to buy housing. We've really created a mess in this country over the last several decades. And I figured now would be a good time to talk about it. We have a new housing minister, Sean Fraser, who was the former Minister of Immigration. So it's a good time because he's kind of doing his journey across the country, if you will, speaking engagements, talking about where he sees issues within the housing market and shedding maybe a glimmer of light into, what they might be able to do to fix it. The one thing I can tell you about housing in this country, and as someone who is a real estate agent, I deal with it every single day. I'm always talking about housing. I'm talking about real estate. It's extremely polarizing depending on who you talk to out there. And when we look at this housing crisis, where we're at today, the affordability issues right across the country, people want to point fingers at a specific thing. And what I find is that whatever is the hot button current topic or trend du jour to be able to point fingers at, that's what happens. So for example, right now, housing crisis, unaffordability, everyone points to immigration. Everyone points to us allowing 1 million people into our country last year, our lofty goals for over 1 million people to come in over the next 3 years. So we want to point at what's easy to point at. And the general public will say, well, no, it's an immigration thing. And, through other times, it's, a supply thing. And a lot of people want to point fingers at developers and say developers are greedy and they're not building enough. And they're not, building enough affordable units out there. At times, people point fingers at the labor market and at employers, and they say we're not having our wages increased enough to be able to afford housing in Vancouver. And these conversations are not just happening here in Vancouver, they're happening in Toronto, they're happening in other areas across Canada, they're happening in Montreal. So, we want to point at what's right in front of us. And the reason we do that as well is this has been such an ongoing issue that for us to actually look back and understand the reason why we are today, we'd have to go way back. We'd have to go decades back and look at, who is responsible in this country to be making sure that everyone has access to affordable housing. It's not the developer, the private companies. It's not the mom and pop landlord. And I've talked about this a lot of times on this channel. The mom and pop landlord takes a lot of heat. Though, we are providing subsidized housing to the market. But, if you ask the general public out there, landlords are villains. They are treated like villains out there when they're just, people may have an extra property, a second property that they want to pass down to children in the future, not uber wealthy people that are investing in these properties. And without that small mom and pop landlord, the rental market, it doesn't work. And I say that lightly because I'm sitting here today with Vancouver rents for 1-bedrooms now hitting $3,000. $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom in Vancouver. And I mentioned off the top, Sean Fraser, housing minister, has been doing his rounds and he's been speaking. And one of the things that he said is, and this has been, caused a lot of ripples in the real estate industry, he said, look, we want to make sure housing is more affordable for people without bringing down the value of your existing homes. So think about that for a second. He wants to make housing more affordable, so essentially bring prices down without bringing prices down. So this is something that I've been putting a lot of thought into. Which direction is he going in here? Because anyone can tell you that that's counterintuitive. You can't create more supply for the market and have prices increase and yet make things more affordable for households. And when I look at it, it's a stark reality and maybe a stark admission of where exactly we are at with real estate across this country. And the reality is what the federal government is saying, and all levels of government know this, but what they're saying without saying it is not everyone who wants to purchase real estate in their lifetime is going to be able to do that, especially in the major cities across Canada, GTA and Vancouver. So even if your dream is to own real estate, it's not going to happen for a lot of people. And I realize that that's not a positive thing to say, that's a negative light, but I think at the same time, what's happening on the federal side is this realization that they've had for some time, it hopefully will allow them to actually address what the issue is that they are able to address. When we talk about housing supply, for instance, and we look at developers and people wanting to point fingers at developers, we're in general, we're just not bringing enough resale supply to the market. And if you look at it from the federal government side of things, what needs to be their priority? They're hearing now that rents are, again, upwards of $3,000 in Vancouver, and they've been going up at a greater clip than resale property values. So, in this country, we have multiple housing crises. We have, the resale supply crisis where people cannot purchase homes. There's not enough quantity, and that's driving up the prices of homes on the resale side of things. But we have a rental crisis that's now overtaking, that housing crisis. So it's a realization by the federal government that, look, not everyone is going to be able to buy a home. Our goal as a federal government is not to make sure everyone is able to purchase a home, but our goal is to make sure that housing is more affordable. And I think with this statement by Sean Fraser, what he's saying is they want to focus heavily on the rental product. I think we're going to see a big shift from all levels of government, whether it's municipal, provincial, federal. There's going to be a heavier shift into rental housing, purpose-built rentals. As it stands today in Vancouver, you're always incentivized as a developer to build rental housing. So, you could have the same size plot of land. If we look at, for example, the Broadway plan, for instance, you could have the same size of land. And if a developer wants to come in and build stratified properties, so properties that they're going to sell off at market rates, you can build less than you can if you want to build a purpose-built rental. So what the governments will do, the cities will do, is they'll say, look, we're going to give you bonus density. We're going to give you more density if you put up a rental building versus putting up units for sale. And so we're going to see even more of a shift from that, and we're going to see more pressure on the federal government side. They're not going to focus as heavily as bringing resale supply to the market, because as much as they try to control who is buying this resale product, it's a lot tougher for them to control that. And when we look at the rental scenario, I've talked about it on this channel before, where we currently now have, tenants being displaced into these $3,000 rents. So they are paying lower rates. Their landlord sells because interest rates are high and costs are up and they're no longer covering the bills. They can't hold on anymore. They sell the property. That tenant gets moved into a higher rent. And so this problem shifts away when you have enough purpose-built rentals. I think the other thing that was extremely telling by Sean Fraser is he said federal government should have never given up the responsibility of providing affordable housing. So it was an admission by Sean Fraser, not necessarily against his own government, because again, This has been an issue stemming back for decades, a decade or more, in which federal governments were responsible for bringing people into the country. They gave up the responsibility of the affordable housing. They gave that up to the provinces and to the cities. And when we drill down to the city level, when we look at it, we had municipalities that were pandering to the voters, and the voters essentially are and were the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard crew. So if you think about it, all of us in our careers, we have people that we are accountable to, that we essentially report to, even if you work for yourself. So for example, I'm a real estate agent, but I report to my clients. In essence, they are my bosses. My clients are my bosses. I work for them. I work on their behalf. And I have to make sure they're happy within the confines of the law. So if you look at the municipalities and how they've engaged in their activities, when it comes to being the ones to actually approve changes in neighborhoods, to approve new housing projects, it fell on their lap. And for them to be able to get voted back in, it was the NIMBYs and the special interest groups, the ones that wanted no changes to their neighborhoods, that were pushing back against development proposals. Those were the people that were key to get the municipal government back into power. So they're making decisions based on a small few. And so when, not in my backyard, when that becomes so prevalent, what ultimately happens over the years is, new projects aren't getting built. And as land values increase, generational wealth is accumulated by, I'll say, a few individuals, although obviously it's much larger than that, but generational wealth is accumulated by those that can hold on to real estate. And it wasn't a conscious decision by NIMBYs that, okay, if we block development, we're going to increase the value of our property. They literally just didn't want their neighborhoods to change. And so ultimately that's what happened. And when the federal government takes their hand off of that pulse, off of that responsibility and that priority, but they're the ones that are opening up the door and opening up the gates for people to come in, you can see how there's a disconnect. So again, I think what we're going to see now, it's not exactly throwing in the towel on the resale front from the federal government, but they realize that the bigger crisis that they need to tackle now is the rental crisis. They need to provide more rental homes across the country. They're probably going to do that by way of bonus density, by increased incentives to developers to build purpose-built rental. Yes, this will affect the price of real estate, but the way it was worded was, we don't want to bring down the value of your existing home, of your home. And I talk about how at the municipal level, they're making decisions so they get re-voted in. The home ownership rate in Canada is about 67%. So homeowners are the voters at the federal level as well. So when they say we don't want to touch the value of your existing home, they're not saying we don't want to affect the value of your existing investments, your rental properties, not necessarily. So yeah, of course, if you have more supply, even on the rental side, you are going to affect real estate values, but it's not going to affect, that higher end detached home so much when you have purpose-built rentals as the new supply coming to market. And when we talk about supply, where exactly are we going? We have to build all this supply, and we need the government to incentivize and all of this to happen. Q2, Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, pre-sale project launches down 30%. Units for sale into the market on the pre-sale side down 40% year over year. So already tight supply, dropping less and less. Absorption rate, so the actual sale rate of those units, went up year over year. So the demand is still there, especially for these pre-sale units. And for the government, if they're to focus developers towards building these resale style units, they have less control over who's going to be purchasing those units. They've tried foreign buyer bans. They've tried to stifle demand, if you will, and it just hasn't worked. So they realize, without forwardly coming out and saying it, that look, home ownership, it's not going to be a reality for most people out there that don't own property right now. It's not going to be a reality in Vancouver or Toronto but they're going to look at ways that they can kind of ease that rental market because they've allowed a couple of crises to brew here. And I'd venture to say that we have a third crisis upcoming, which is a labor crisis, which is why it's a labor race trying to bring more people into the country. So it's counterintuitive, but it's a necessity. You know, Canada just pulled 10,000 workers from the US that are in the tech industry because they needed to beef up the tech industry here in Canada. So it's a human resource battle out there between the developed countries as well, which is only going to make real estate prices move up further. So, you know, to kind of surmise this whole video, you guys that are watching this channel, you're either buying or selling real estate right now, you already own real estate, you're thinking of doing it. What does this all mean for you? I want to first say that if you're someone who is getting priced out of this market, you know, the people that I'm saying, you know, you may never have the chance to buy real estate here in Vancouver, the GTA, there are several areas across the country where you can purchase real estate for affordable amount of money, and you can actually cash flow. You can rent those out and you can earn enough income off of those to cover the bill and even income above that. I know that sounds crazy for someone that wants to purchase a home where they live, but I encourage people that can't do it here to look into purchasing in other areas and just getting into the market. And that way, when, you know, markets appreciate across the country, you're able to be a player in that as well. You're able to benefit from that. And who knows where you're going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now, where you're going to be living with remote workforces. You may not actually even need to live here in the city in Vancouver. So don't lose hope in purchasing real estate. Real estate is achievable for everyone, but it just may not be achievable in these certain segments of the market that are undersupplied with high demand. If you're someone that, you know, is thinking of buying real estate, you know, I think all of this just goes to show that the value of real estate over time, it's going to increase. This is in my humble opinion. It's going to increase over the long term. When we can't supply enough homes, when developers are building less, when the federal government is essentially saying, look, we can't even battle this housing affordability crisis from a resale perspective. We really just need to focus on the rental perspective and making sure people can afford their rents. That tells you that the value of a property to own over time is going to go up. There are a lot of top cities out there where, you know, unfortunately, they are essentially renter cities. Predominantly, everyone is renting their properties, and there are fewer landowners or property owners that are owning masses of real estate. And unfortunately, there's, you know, the haves and the have-nots. That gap grows wider as these values increase. But again, if you're someone that's thinking of getting into the market, and now is the right time for you because you can do it financially, again, it's my thesis that over a long period of time, real estate, you know, it has to continue to go up in value. And of course, if you're someone that holds real estate right now, you're selling, you're buying, oftentimes you're selling because of life circumstance. So, and most people that are selling, they are remaining in the market. So, you know, your investment or your property, in my opinion, again, over the long haul, it will go up. And we do have to keep in mind the theme of this video is, you know, property isn't an investment first. It's a roof over people's heads. It's a necessity. It's a necessity that admittedly the federal government kind of took their hands off of. It looks like they're going to get more involved in that moving forward. So guys, that is this week's video. I hope you learned something in it or you enjoyed. If you did, I'd love it if you could hit the like button, because what that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can learn from it as well. And if you enjoy this weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss next week's video. And if you're in the Vancouver area or the Fraser Valley and you want to talk about your own real estate situation with me one-on-one, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below. We can chat about your scenario, or you can just give me a call, send me a text, shoot me an email, whatever works for you. I'd be happy to chat with you one-on-one, but I want to thank you again for watching this week's video, and I look forward to seeing you next week.